Not welcome. Donald Trump is ending a program that's protected thousands of undocumented immigrants who entered the U.S. as children. So what's the fallout for scrapping DACA, and is politics involved in this controversial decision? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. About 800,000 young people in the United States are now in legal limbo. President Trump has scrapped the Obama-era immigration program known as DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It protected young undocumented immigrants from deportation. Now Congress has 6 months to replace it. Former President Barack Obama has called it cruel and wrong. But Trump says he's upholding the Constitution. We'll get to our guests in a moment. But first, Kimberly Hackett sets up our discussion from Washington, D.C.
We are the dreamers!
Angry reaction in cities and towns all across the United States. Protests, too, outside the White House as hundreds gathered to demonstrate against the Trump administration's halt to a program that's allowed hundreds of thousands of people who came to the U.S. illegally as children to live and work.
Good morning.
On Tuesday, the U.S. Attorney General announced the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, put in place by President Obama in 2012, is illegal, given it's Congress, not the White House, that should create immigration law.
Such an open-ended circumvention of immigration laws was an unconstitutional exercise of authority by the executive branch.
It's a charge Obama denies. On his Facebook page, he criticizes the rescinding of DACA, writing, "It is self-defeating and it is cruel." Let's be clear, the action taken today isn't required legally. It's a political decision and a moral question.
To qualify for DACA, applicants needed to have a few things like being in the United States by their 16th birthday. They couldn't have a criminal record, and they needed to be in school or hold a diploma from a high school or university.
Congress now has 6 months to come up with a plan to address the legal limbo DACA recipients face as their temporary school and work permits expire. Congress tried to reform immigration in 2010 and failed, but Donald Trump is optimistic.
When speaking to members of Congress, they want to be able to do something and do it right. And really, we have no choice. We have to be able to do something. And I think it's going to work out very well. And long term, it's going to be the right solution.
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
Adriel Cascara is less optimistic and fears for his future. He came to the U.S. when he was just 6 months old.
This is my home, and for that to be ripped away from me and being told that I'm not enough, or rather I will not be given the same opportunities only because I don't have the same documentation status as everyone else, is truly unfair.
Indeed, government immigration officials have admitted DACA permit holders are considered illegal immigrants, and without new protections from Congress, they could face imminent deportation to home countries some have never known. Kimberly Hackett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Trump spoke extensively about immigration reform while on the campaign trail. Here's some of what he's done since taking office. He's banned people from 6 Muslim-majority countries from visiting or moving to the U.S. unless they have a close relative there. Trump has also limited the total number of refugees the U.S. will accept. The quota for this year was met in mid-July. And he continues to promise to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border. Some Republican leaders have reportedly told Democrats they will reinstate DACA in exchange for help in paying for that wall. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Washington, Rina Shah, founder and principal of Rilax Strategist. In New York, attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, Noor Zafar. And in Philadelphia, Republican political strategist Joe Watkins. Welcome to you all. Let me start by asking Mr. Watkins this. Mr. Watkins, what's wrong with a program that offers safe haven for thousands of undocumented young immigrants who have never known another home than the U.S.?
Nothing's wrong with that program. The argument that Republicans are making in the Congress is that it needs to be orchestrated by the legislative branch of government, that the Congress is the one that needs to put together that legislation, and that it ought not come from the President of the United States, be it President Obama or President Trump. And so that's been the bone of contention, but it makes good sense to have such a program to offer safe haven for those people who come to this country, the sons and daughters of people who come here illegally, who through no fault of their own are already here and are in school or working.
Let me go to Zafar. Zafar, is this a legitimate debate to say that the real problem about the program is not the substance of the program, but the fact that it hasn't gone through the legislative branch and therefore it has to go to the Congress to become a legitimate document?
No, I don't think it is a legitimate argument, simply because, it's interesting when Attorney General Jeff Sessions yesterday announced that the Trump administration was repealing DACA, the main argument that he used was that DACA violates this principle of the separation of powers, that, the executive, namely President Obama, overstepped his authority by creating and implementing DACA. And that's simply not true. If you look at both the Constitution and you look at the main immigration statute that Congress has passed in 1952, the Immigration and Naturalization Act, in it, Congress expressly gives the executive branch, and in this case DHS, the power to use its discretion when deciding which groups of people it's going to enforce immigration law against. And this concept of what's known as prosecutorial discretion is what DACA is based on, which basically allows DHS to not schedule people who fall under the DACA requirements, not schedule them for deportation. So it's absolutely within both the constitutional and the legislative statutory powers of the
Also, let me now go to Rina Shah. Also, Sessions yesterday said basically that failure to enforce the law puts the nation at risk of crime, violence, and even terrorism. But Shah, we're talking about people who have gone through FBI background check with clean criminal record, went to school, and started their families in the U.S.
The interesting thing here is that there was no real fact or evidence that the Attorney General used to back up his claim that these DACA recipients are committing crimes and other such things. This is making scapegoats out of immigrants and their children. I think it's important to declare today, after yesterday's melee, that compassionate conservatism is dead. This administration does not care about the people of this country if they are going to target innocent children of illegal immigrants. These children came here not knowing, and they were innocent. And to target them when we have so many other issues around the country, around the world that need this administration's attention and time, I think is completely, it just shows a lack of leadership more than anything else.
Mr. Watkins, if there's nothing wrong with this program, why would Trump take the decision to scrap it? Do you see any element here of political pragmatism, opportunism, or just political gamble?
Well, he was under some pressure. At least he felt, the White House felt that they were under some pressure, given the fact that there were, I think, at least 8 state attorneys general in the United States that were going to press forward with a lawsuit because of the way in which DACA came to be. And they had basically given President Trump an ultimatum that if he didn't do something about the program, if he didn't, of course, decide to do away with DACA, that they would go to court to get something done. And so he felt, I think, under pressure to do something. Of course, there are so many Republicans in Congress, including the majority leader, Paul Ryan, on the House side, a Republican who said, Mr. President, don't do anything. I mean, let Congress deal with it at some point in a later date, but don't you do anything. Don't you end the program. Let us deal with it. Let us fashion legislation that is compassionate, that works for everybody. But nonetheless, the president felt pressured to have that announcement made yesterday by the Attorney General. And not all Republicans, as a matter of fact, many Republicans are not in agreement. Now they've got a 6-month window to do something, and that puts a lot of pressure on them.
Let me go to Zafar. Zafar, give us some legal perspective here. So they have this 6-month window, but what if nothing happens? What if the Congress fails to come up with a legislation? Are these people under the risk of being deported from the U.S.?
Well, the program won't be repealed until March is when the official kind of phase out will end. And I think already we've seen governors from several states, New York and California and Washington, saying that they're looking into potential legal challenges against the repeal of DACA. So I think it's just kind of like a wait and see what legal actions are brought. And there's also a case in New York where plaintiffs have already amended, their complaint to say that this repeal of DACA is unconstitutional, and we'll see how that existing litigation already proceeds. So I think even before we get to that, the official March 5th end date, we'll see legal challenges which may enjoin or prevent DACA from being repealed.
So, Rina Shah, is the president by this step just trying to sort of tell people this is a promise that I made during the campaign and therefore I'm honoring this promise?
Without a doubt, the president is honoring a promise to his base. The base that elected Trump is very unusual from what many call the establishment Republicans. I've made my career in Republican politics, and I'm ashamed to say I'm a member of this party today. This is not how the majority of Republicans feel about immigrants. We think immigrants make this country great. I think the president was not under any pressure from anywhere. I mean, these 8 attorney generals, fine, let them file a lawsuit. The pressure he was under was from people within his own administration, people like Attorney General Jeff Sessions, people like Stephen Miller, an advisor to the president. These people are propping up white supremacy and trying to guise it under policy. This was a policy priority for these people. They want to get rid of immigrants in this country that are not white. And this is basically what aiming for DACA recipients, that's just the beginning of that. And so I think this is a very dangerous path that this administration is going down. The president did not have to act on this. This was a political decision. Putting the attorney general out there made it look like a legal decision. That's incredibly deceptive. We should be worried about that. The optics are what Mr. Trump wants. He wants to make it look like he's being strong, but frankly, he's being puppeted.
This is exactly what I would like to get the view of Mr. Watkins on this as a Republican political strategist. Mr. Watkins, the president takes a decision, outsources the decision to Jeff Sessions, then punts the whole scheme to the Congress. What kind of message is he sending the world?
Well, that's a very, it's not a good message, certainly. I know he was trying to take some of the heat off himself. I worked in the White House for a United States president. I know the pressure that presidents come under, given even some of the different groups that support them that got them elected. And he's been under tremendous pressure from his base, especially that right-wing side of his base to make this kind of a move. I don't think in his heart of hearts that he really wanted to do this. And he certainly didn't want to take all the blame for it, which is why he let Attorney General Jeff Sessions make the announcement, and also gave Congress 6 months to before the phase out to actually come up with legislation to fix it. But nonetheless, it doesn't take away the pain or the angst in the minds of those 800,000 young people, especially who were born overseas and now live here and are going to school or working here and are good citizens, are good people, hardworking people, and good students who certainly deserve a shot. So it's a very, very difficult position. It puts the president in a very awkward position. If he wants to get the important legislation this fall passed, like a debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling, and also getting a funding bill, as well as tackling the important issue of tax reform, he's made that a lot more difficult now with this decision yesterday in DACA.
Zafar, what do you make of this report that Trump is trying to sort of trade this whole program for funding for the wall on the border with Mexico? In a way, he's telling the Democrats, help me with this, I'll help you with DACA.
I think that the notion that this ultimately is a political decision and not something rooted in the law is kind of evident even in, if you look at, again, the rationale that Attorney General Sessions used to justify the repeal of DACA. He said that it's about separation of powers and that in the realm of immigration, the executive does not have unfettered power to just legislate and create programs like DACA. But this is the exact opposite of what the Trump administration is arguing in the Muslim travel Taliban cases, where they're explicitly saying that when it comes to immigration, when it comes to national security, when it comes to securing the borders and deciding who comes in, who goes out, this is a realm that the executive has almost unfettered power. So just the inconsistency even in the Department of Justice's positions when it comes to these two matters shows that ultimately the decision to repeal DACA is not about some principled appeal to the rule of law, but it's about pandering to the white supremacist and nativist base in the Republican Party.
Rina Shah, we've seen the salvo of statements from the Democrats lashing out at the decision to scrap DACA, basically describing it as heartless, shameful, so on and so forth. Do you think that the Democrats will have no other option ultimately but to negotiate a compromise with Donald Trump on DACA?
So I think something is really funny here. We're 9 months now into this president's term, and we've seen, of course, big hiccups in the president's plans, healthcare being one of them. And when his lack of leadership is evident and something doesn't happen like he says it will happen, what's happening is that members of both parties on Capitol Hill are coming together, and governors in the states are coming together, again, from both parties, and trying to craft solutions. So what I'm hopeful about is that this mixed messaging that came out of the White House on DACA, him saying that Congress should do their job and act on DACA, but then coming back and implying that he can do something, I'm hoping all this nonsense really just leads to both parties sitting down in Congress and saying, we need to fix this broken immigration system. There are people on both sides of the aisle who've known this and acknowledged this for a very long time. Yes, it's Congress's fault for not having acted thus far, but there are huge priorities this month. I'm just hopeful that Democrats will decide to sort of, once again, it's only been 9 months, but they've done this before, say, let's circumvent the president, let's go to our Republican colleagues who are in the majority in both houses of Congress and do something together that does not hurt the American people the way this president is trying to do with these fast executive orders. I mean, he's signed close to 50 by now, and it's only been 9 months.
Mr. Watkins, I mean, the reason why I've been asking you about the reason why we know that top political advisors, when they decide the timing of any decision to make, they look into its implications in the near future. Here we are with a very thorny issue. You have the midterm elections coming soon, and then you have Republicans who have to decide one of the most essential components of could be Trump's legacy in the near future. They might look as bad guys in the near future if they decide to go with DACA.
That's exactly right. That's what a lot of Republican members, especially the members of the House, all of whom are up for re-election in 2018, have to consider. And a number of U.S. senators are up for re-election as well in 2018. They've got to consider how they look to their constituents, to the people who have to vote them back into office. And so they've got to take into consideration the legislation that they formulate, how it's structured, and they have to make sure that they aren't looking like they are trying to inflict pain on these innocent people who were brought to this country by their parents, maybe illegally, but who have complied so far with the law, who have provided all the documentation, who have kept in contact with the national authorities, and who are in school or working right now and are law-abiding people. So they've got some tough decisions ahead. It's very possible that Republicans could take some losses in the 2018 midterm elections. This could definitely be one of the most defining moments. Noor, Zafar, I mean, do you see here any potential for bipartisan approach that could reform the whole immigration law?
You know, I think the potential is there, but it's definitely an uphill battle. And it's heartening to see some people on the Republican side, some congressmen and senators come out in support of DACA and kind of stressing the importance of passing legislation that would kind of formalize DACA as law. But then again, we had during the Obama administration repeated attempts to pass the DREAM Act, but which were not successful, which ultimately led President Obama to then create DACA as an executive program. So I think there's hope, but it'll definitely be an uphill battle for sure.
Rina Shah, can the Republicans ultimately strike the delicate balance, which is basically keeping the base and reaching out to the Hispanics in this particular episode?
It's definitely, it's a walk that is going to have to be done very carefully and methodically. It's very possible that the Republican leadership within Congress screws this one up and suffers losses as a result. And I think that would be very necessary for them to have a wake-up call and understand that. Look, this is something I said last year as I opposed President Trump's candidacy, even before he became the presumptive nominee for president. I said that President Trump's supporters were not really Republicans. At the end of the day, they weren't the people that were going to keep electing these Republicans within Congress. So it would behoove these establishment Republicans, the Republicans within Congress, to understand that and to not take everything as something that needs to be served up to Trump's quote-unquote base, that they don't need to kowtow to the demands of this base. This base is extreme, and what they want are extreme policy shifts, and I don't think that's good for the Republican Party. So they may have to suffer serious losses. Of course, recruitment of Hispanic candidates, Hispanic elected officials within the Republican Party, it's a staggeringly low number. It's something the Republican Party has been working to fix for a very long time. I personally have been involved with trying to get more Asian Americans into the Republican Party. This just sets us back so many more steps if Republicans in Congress don't realize that trying to please President Trump's base will not be good for them.
I see your
point. They need to realize that and act in the interest of their congressional districts.
Mr. Watkins, this is a president who's obviously struggling to dismantle the legacy of Obama. So we've seen him with the Obamacare, for example, going for repeal and then with the aim of replacing. What if he fails this time to scrap the deal and convince at the same time the Congress to reform it? Will it have a huge impact on his future?
Well, the news is so fast moving, and already in just the 9 months that Donald Trump has been president, there have been so many big issues that have come and gone. So I don't know that any one of them can be said to be the thing that really defines his presidency. But clearly, if he doesn't have a success or several successes legislatively soon, it's going to be hard for him to say that his time in office was successful. Americans look to see whether or not you make good on your promises, and clearly he said he was going to do something about fixing health care in this country. If I were him, I'd be less inclined to try to undo President Obama's legacy and more inclined just to fix whatever isn't working in health care and to send that message out as opposed to, we just want to repeal and replace Obamacare. But nonetheless, he's not been able to get that done. And now he has to consider how he's going to get tax reform done. That's an important issue. But he's got to keep the government open in the meantime and also get the debt ceiling lifted a little bit so they can borrow more money. And those are all tall orders, especially when you consider the fact that now Democrats have the bargaining chip of DACA, the DACA legislation, which has to happen in the next 6 months. So he puts himself in a very difficult position. If in 2018, as they go back for re-elections, they don't have a single legislative accomplishment to point to, if they can't say that they passed tax reform or health care or something, it's going to be very, very hard for those Republicans to make the case to their constituents that they should be returned to Congress and the Senate in 2018.
No, Zafar, please, in less than 1 minute, if the legislation fails, what kind of impact will it have on the future of President Trump?
I mean, I think it'll just reaffirm the platform that President Trump came to power in. The nativist, the xenophobic, the Islamophobic platform. And I think, this announcement yesterday creates real fear amongst more than 800,000 recipients of DACA. And I think just the human impact of kicking out of the country people who don't have another home besides the United States is just exceedingly cruel. And I don't think a measure like this can in any way be good for President Trump's legacy.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all our guests, Rina Shah, Noor, Zafar and Joe Watkins. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.